Good afternoon or good evening to wherever you might be joining us from. Today, we're going to be talking about innovation, manufacturing, and disruption, and what is the toolkit that you need for tomorrow to make the best medical devices. But before we get started, we need to do a little reenactment of how this came to be and give you a little bit of backstory. Hey, Abby, how's it going? Oh, I'm doing great. Wonderful. We're making a video. Really? Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, sounds like fun. I'm in. Yeah. Got me in. How long? 60 minutes. Okay. Topic? Yep. Got it. Got it. How about for budget? Hair and makeup? Oh, okay. Yeah, I get I don't have hair, but it doesn't mean we don't get a budget for it. Fine, fine. Video crew? I'm not sure who me, myself is. I don't think I've met them. Oh, shoot. Yeah, me, myself, and I. Okay. Got it. Lighting. Flashlight. Oh. Yeah, I'll open a window. That should be good. Okay, so what do you call less than a shoestring budget? Yeah, that sounds like what we got. Think outside the box? Okay, well, we'll think outside the box. Sounds great. All right, I'm looking forward to it. I'm definitely going to need some help, though. So you're probably asking, what in the world are we up to? But you know what? We tried something a little bit different. We want to come at you guys with more of a, let's just sit down, have a conversation, and tell you what we think. What are the things that we are challenged with? What are we telling our customers, and what are our customers telling us that, hey, this is a challenging time. 2020 has come and gone, and 2021, at least the first half of the year, is shaping up to be not quite as bad, but still has many of the challenges that we are faced with that we saw in 2021. But what we're set out today to do is to sit down with you in a conversation like this. Not many slides. We want to keep this as informal as possible, answer some of the most difficult and toughest questions that are out there, and while we're doing that, give you a couple tips and tricks along the way just to make sure you're ready for tomorrow's challenges and can be successful at it. So I said I need some help. Let's go get Rob and see what he has to say about it.
Thanks, Chris. So being that we're at Medical Design and Manufacturing Conference, I would venture a guess that most of us in the room have spent some time around manufacturing, and most of us have run into some situations where a little bit of time savings or acceleration in the manufacturing cycles really goes a long way, right? So, but that question of how important is speed, or how much should I be prioritizing speed, has a definitive answer. And that answer is that it definitely depends. Nothing is ever as simple as it seems in manufacturing, and this subject is really no different. There are so many variables that are unique to you that you're really the only person that can truly answer that question, but there are helpful things to think about and questions that you can ask that gets you well on your way to answering it for yourself. So things like your stage in the development process. For example, are you in early stages right now? Are you in late stages? Typically when you get into the later stages, it can be hard to change stuff. So people get the most value out of starting out, with a faster manufacturing process and then carrying that through the entire development process. Number two here, level of innovation. This is a big one that we're going to talk about here on the next slide. But are you releasing something that's new and groundbreaking? Or are you releasing something that's an incremental update to an existing product? That level of innovation can really impact the processes and make speed more valuable, and we'll explain why here in a moment. Level of design risk. How risky is this product, right? Is this something that's going to go into the body, for example, or something that's highly regulated? In those types of cases, obviously more iteration early on in the process becomes really valuable to make sure that we get it right. And then, these last two are kind of more built around production. And again, talk about these here on the next slide. But demand volatility and ability to forecast, as well as macro forces and regulation, right? How confident am I in my ability to forecast what I'm going to sell? And are there macro forces or regulation that could potentially impact that demand? Those are big things to be thinking about. And they're really the topics that are going to shape how important speed is. But there's also a couple of questions that become really important here too. So now, for medical specifically, a lot of the speed advantage comes in the form of risk mitigation and time to market for new products. And this really applies to accelerating prototyping and development. When we're in this stage, two questions become quite important typically, and those are how many products are we releasing as a team, as a company, right? How many times are we going to go through this cycle? And how much design risk do we have? So if you're releasing a lot of products, you get like this aggregated benefit of speed and of time saved that compounds from product release to product release. And what it really does is help to minimize downtime and enable you to complete more without having to expand your team, for example, especially if those products are highly iterative or have a lot of development gates that you need to get through. Condensing those timelines is generally really helpful because you're simply able to accomplish more things in less time. If the products also carry inherent design risk, as many of our medical devices do, speed also becomes a big risk mitigation tool. Maybe your product launch timeline, for example, is static. It's not just easy to change those things most of the time. And in that case, accelerating the development process means more iterations, more testing and learning, more optimizing, and ultimately a better chance of successfully clearing, regulatory standards and launching the product and having it be a success in the marketplace. So again, early on and in the development stages, two key questions are how many products are we releasing and how much inherent design risk is there in the product. The answer to those questions will typically give you a great starting point to determine how to prioritize for your unique needs. Now, I've been discussing specifically prototyping and development here, but what about when you're ready to get this thing into market? And the question of how important is speed in production or when you're getting to production is also, not surprisingly, a little bit complicated. But once again, we have a couple of questions that can point us in the right direction. This is where we start to get back to that level of innovation thing, right? How innovative is this product? Is this radically innovative? Is this incremental innovation? This really gets to the heart of the questions, which are how many of these do we think that we need, and how confident are we in our ability to forecast that need? So now in development and prototyping, there's really kind of this inherent benefit of speed, right? We can always use a little extra acceleration or a little extra time, but in production, speed typically becomes more or less valuable based on our ability to forecast. So getting back to incremental versus radical innovation, right? Maybe this device is an incremental improvement over a previous device. It's going to replace that device in the market, and the one that we have right now sells 50,000 per year. If you have a high degree of confidence in that forecast, then speed might not be the highest priority, right? You might be prioritizing things like flexibility, consistency, quality. If the device is something that's radically innovative, however, right, this is a first to market kind of thing, chances are you don't have that historical benchmark that gives you a solid, confident forecast. And in this case, speed gives you a lot of advantages. For one, you can control your risk exposure by ramping your production with demand. And in this case, you can minimize inventory risk that could be created by minimum order quantities. So you bought 20,000 of these, right? Because you had a minimum order quantity, and now you're selling 1,000 a month. And those parts that you're not using are sitting in a warehouse. They're not generating revenue. This is a pretty obvious example that we hear about all the time. But the real value here is in the ability to react to the stuff that we might not see coming, right? Macro forces, regulation, competition, all of these things. We looked at just a few short months ago, and we had a macro event that forced many companies in the space to react really quickly to meet unprecedented demand and do it faster than we've ever done it, right? And unfortunately, on the other hand, we also had many companies that had to react to demand turning down almost overnight. So you can see how inventory and warehousing costs and things like that can start to become a challenge in the event of uncertainty. And that's really what speed helps us mitigate and respond to are these unforeseen circumstances. It gives us so much flexibility in our supply chains. So now that we've talked through some of the ways that speed makes real world impacts in development and in production, I'm going to kick it over to Chris to talk about how you can start to inject some of that speed into the overall process by matching technology to different stages in the product lifecycle.
Welcome back, guys. You're probably asking yourself, wardrobe change? Let me tell you a story. So we first started out this whole idea and started going and did all our filming across everyone, but I was the only one that had some parts missing. So two of the three sessions didn't exist. Now, me, myself, and I all have our story straight, and we 100% agree it was fun. Here nor there, I digress. So, as Ron mentioned with speed, it's highly dependent on a number of factors. But what does selecting manufacturing process technology in different stages of the life cycle? Unfortunately, here, that same story is true. It depends heavily on a multitude of factors, and I hope to share a few insights with you today of what that secret sauce might look like, or how do we crack into it and get more from it. To truly understand the process, we have to break the product lifecycle into three pieces. And that's what we're going to show here on this next slide. Prototype, transition, production. And you might be asking yourself, what is transition? I understand what prototype and production is. What is this thing in the middle? So I want to focus on the middle section for a few minutes, as this is often where we feel speed and cost is highly compromised, or it goes sideways very quickly. From the mentality it's easy to make one part to making many is something that is a challenge for many people, because again, you're in a closed environment, and a single production part or simple assembly is relatively easy when you have your high skilled labor or your most qualified individual to make that. But what happens when you start multiplying that across tens, hundreds, or thousands, if not millions of parts? What does that really mean for the manufacturing process? But in manufacturing, this is most commonly referred to as repeatability, or some of us refer to it as CBK values, and just showing how many parts per million might not be expected. So thinking about this whole aspect about it, we have to ask ourselves, well, if there's no consistency, what do we do? And so now I challenge you to think about something about this, is to say, think about how you tie your shoe every day. Do you always tie it to the exact same snugness? Or why does some days your shoelace come undone? What feels like times, and tie it. So how does that relate to all this? Is to say, yeah, we know that tying your shoe, although may not be perfectly snug or highly repeatable every day, it gets the job done. So when comparing these two things together, we have to understand is when we're going from a prototype, what is the ideal solution or ideal perfect fit versus what's good enough to get the job done. Now, sometimes this is often referred to our spec limits or assembly verification aspect. But that's just one way to look at it. And repeatability, no matter how you slice it, is a really important key factor when talking about med device or any of the components assemblies with it. So this transition period, although the smallest piece of the project and the timeline, we often find is undervalued because it doesn't take into consideration the repeatability aspect. Again, when transitioning from one to hundreds, that's a big shift or a big change in mindset. At this point, we often feel that customers lose time, lose resources, or run into all kind of hurdles at this point because it's, again, a very big mind shift. So what does all that mean from your perspective when picking an actual technology, and how does that make you successful along the road? So when you're going through this validation process, we find that most of the time, again, based on our customer subset, we find that they often run into this challenge shortly after planning. Something like, I have my marketing strategy, I have my regulatory submission strategy, leadership has defined a budget, timeline, although probably not realistic for the time. You have your objectives. So again, you're shifting from that mindset. We've made one, we successfully tested it, we know it functionally works. Now I need to make hundreds of thousands of them. How do we figure out what to do? So, as an R&D engineer and previously in some similar roles like that, this is a big challenge because you're fit to make the task of, we have to finish the timeline with the price of X. More often than times, we often question and say, how is this possible? How are we going to do this in the set time? No one always knows. But again, this is a fundamental thing in the R&D process that we feel is a key area to keep an eye on when matching technology. So I keep referring to this as matching technology. There's a number of different technologies out there, and at Protolabs, we focus on 4 of them: injection molding, CNC, 3D printing, and sheet metal. Now, again, there's tons more out there, a lot of things different to think about, but the context of this, I'll be referring to those 4 just for simplicity's sake. So, have our timeline, have our budget, going from one part, thousands of parts. Not quite as easy. So, what we think, and we're going to look at traditional versus digital. This example here, as you see on the screen, is really focused on a couple of things. Now, this example is multiple technologies across what we're calling the development up to the launch phase. Not always this is true, but in this particular case, we look at 3D printing and CNC as a speed-oriented service. They're quick, they're making that 1 part or 2 parts, and they can do it at a rapid rate of days. Well, as you move more into the injection molding, the timeline gets to be a little more extended. We'll focus a little bit on that repeatability aspect. Do know, this is not saying that the first part of it, CNC or 3D printing, is not repeatable. It's just that you're looking for a piece part price or something that's going to be a little more economical at scale. Now, that's not always true, but we'll talk about that a little bit later in 3D printing, how there are some cases that isn't true, and it is more cost effective to go down the 3D printing route. So as we look at this and we say, okay, multiple technologies, makes sense. Everyone kind of knows that. But what are some of the takeaways to take away from all of this? So I've come up with 5 different things to think about as you're working through this process. And again, this is focusing in really on that transition phase of going from 1 to hundreds or thousands or millions. And the biggest one we can't tell people enough is risk. Think about risk. And as Rob talked about, there's different risk levels where you can deem it appropriate, or, hey, you know what, this isn't just right for us at the moment. Don't forget about the manufacturing process. You often focus on the product, but the manufacturing side is also just as valuable. And what I mean by that is, know to yourself is, hey, if we are going to go to millions of parts, don't think of it as like, oh, we're going to 3D print 10 million parts. It's just probably not feasible, or vice versa. If you're going to design something for multiple millions of parts, only make 100 of them, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Now, what does that have to do with risk? So from this standpoint, is like many medical devices, once you lock in a process, it's really challenging or difficult to shift out of that process one way or another, unless you go in with the approach of what if we do all of them or qualify all of them down the line, or as we move through that R&D process, as we saw in the previous page. So that kind of leads into our next point is plan with speed in mind, design, test, and iterate when possible. And what I mean by that is focusing on that early stage of how do I make 1, 10, or 100, but do it really, really well and learn at a rate that's just not feasible if you're going to go down the high manufacturing route of multi-million year. Now, you were saying here, okay, taking into risk and factor, I've planned around what my potential volume could be. Shouldn't that be good enough to get everything there? But this goes into my third point is what you start with may not be where you end. Design with the end process in mind. For example, we have customers that will come to us and will design a 3D printed part or CNC part, knowing that they may go to injection molding, but forget to put draft on their angles, on their sides. But when they get to the injection molding, now all of a sudden their design has to change because draft wasn't included. They start adding that draft and their assembly no longer works or functions properly, causing a revalidation. Again, focusing in on that transitional stage of what did we start with and where are we going? Now, if we balance that all out and say, if we know where we're going, the upfront cost of maybe designing it different or taking in different considerations, and we'll get into a little bit more of that a little later on, but knowing that if you spend that cost up front, it's going to pay dividends later on because a potential redesign after something has been validated is very, very costly. Or worst case, if it ever gets approved by the FDA or has already reached market and needs a redesign, very expensive. So now we look into the next one, innovative versus disruptive manufacturing technologies, very similar to your iPhone or your Android or Google Pixel, whatever phone that you might have, we know that there's a new flavor each year. The newest and latest, greatest, best features come out and everyone has to have it. How's that work in manufacturing? Well, up to about the last 5 years, that really wasn't a factor. But as time moves along, we're starting to see different manufacturing processes and technologies evolving at a rate that's never been seen before. For example, 3D printing has seen an enormous amount of innovation from like carbon, HP with their 3D metal printing, to a number of different things. This is moving at a rate that once before was never seen before. And to be frank, I think like every 1 out of 5 people probably has a desktop printer, 3D printer, hanging around in their garage for hobbyists. Okay, maybe not that many, but we all wish we had one and want one. So again, this is really starting to look at more technology is becoming cost effective, but also available for more people, making innovation move at a much faster rate. This is only going to carry over into the manufacturing process as many, the DIY home builder and innovator doesn't have to be a multi-billion dollar company. So move on to the last aspect of this. Now everyone's got access to this technology, but total cost of ownership really starts to play into this factor. Again, focusing on the transition side of going from 1 to 100, we start to think and ask ourselves is, well, if I print them now and I sell them and move that cash through the company, how is that different than potentially, maybe investing a high amount of capital into an injection molding machine only to get, a 10% haircut on a piece part price? Balancing that out with total cost of ownership is a really interesting problem and challenge for most individuals, especially those in the supply chain industry, focusing in on harmonizing demand versus what's on their shelves, and don't want to pay for product you're not going to use or sit around on the shelf. So we've always challenged people to think about that, is to not always think of it as this is an upfront cost today, but it's what does the whole life cycle of this product look like? Now, in some cases, that makes total sense to go from 3D printed parts to a multi-million-dollar pool for hundreds of millions of parts. But when your demand is unknown and you're trying to get to market fast and where speed is important, we feel that the total cost of ownership is actually better to delay some of that larger capital until the product's been proven in the market, or at least proven through clinical studies. So the biggest and most important question we always get is, can 3D printing really take over production? And again, this goes directly into that question of total cost of ownership. What if I don't have to buy an injection molding tool and I could just print everything? Great question. I'm going to hand it over to Stephen. He's going to tell us a little bit more about that. I'll catch back up with you in a little bit.
Thank you, Chris. My name is Stephen Wright, and I'm a senior account manager here at Protolabs, as well as the product sales leader for the 3D printing service line. I've got the incredible opportunity to not only work on the front lines with our customers, but also to help shape what 3D printing looks like here at Protolabs today and in the future. Now that you've heard from Chris and know that 3D printing is a way to quickly prototype and analyze if a part will fit your needs for verification and validation activities, there's a lot to consider when developing products. You have things such as geometrical fit, its fit to other components, fit within packaging materials, fit within procedural kits or offerings, and the list goes on. There's additionally ergonomic fit to consider. We understand that in the medical industry, how important it is to receive validation that the ergonomic fit is agreeable. And you have to ensure that your human factors engineering plan is solid. Not only that, we also have the material fit. We understand that material selection is key for you based on your performance goals and risk assessments for the project. Needless to say, it's true. 3D printing is an unbelievably valuable tool for prototyping parts for fit and form. Here we're taking a look at the microfine 3D printing technology. It's an SLA technology, fantastic for printing small parts with fine resolution and very minimal layer lines. Now, as you looked at the screen there, you saw a video clip of some of the components that we can build to support the medical industry, which we know moves at a very fast and iterative pace. The high precision required on these parts is likely why the customer leveraged our microfine, micro-resolution material. And in this case, the parts are green. Don't worry though. The microfine material is also available in gray if that is a little bit more your speed. What you're seeing here is the stereolithography 3D printing process, which has been around since the late 1980s. It's a process that provides fine feature details, high resolution, something that's a little bit harder to achieve with other 3D printing technologies such as FDM or fused deposition modeling. And there are a lot of other ways to think about the use of stereolithography. Take, for example, a part that Protolabs made to help support ventilator production supply chains last year. This part was 3D printed because the tube geometry was not achievable using conventional manufacturing processes, and the final design helped avoid the usage of multiple parts. This coupler design had some initial design requirements and involved space constraints, and producing the final design additively with stereolithography allowed for a solution. Now, we have a lot of other 3D printing technologies that you can utilize here to help benefit your product development here in the medical industry. Take, for instance, carbon. 3D printing is becoming a quick go-to solution for the right production use cases, and carbon is one of the best technologies we have for that. I'll show you a quick clip here of the carbon technology in action. Now, the carbon digital light synthesis process offers engineering grade materials and a way to scale production parts that are not crossing the pricing thresholds that make injection molding an appealing option. Multi-piece consolidation of nozzles, rigid mounts, housings, and snap fit features are all an excellent use case for medical applications, and they're all easily attainable with the carbon technology. HP's multi-jet fusion process is another additive technology that is rapidly becoming an economical choice for medical product developers. We recently worked with OVR Technology to help bring their patented technology to market. OVR was interested in leveraging 3D printing as both a cost-effective prototyping and low-volume production solution for its patented OX1 scent emitting device. This technology uses virtual reality to aid veterans with PTSD. Small shameless plug here. We are going to be featuring this company on an upcoming podcast, The Digital Thread. So be on the lookout for that. I think it should be a really great conversation with a really great goal for them in mind. And to close it out, it should be no surprise that metal 3D printing is making moves in the medical industry as well. And here we can just take a look at some of the different types of parts that we make in DMLS most commonly. These appear to be a little bit more engine type components, not necessarily medical, but the cleaning capabilities with DMLS are absolutely fantastic. We can do post-processing, post-machining, a lot of different options here available to you. As we progress forward, we are seeing a lot of medical device prototyping with our metal materials, but we're also seeing a lot of projects requiring turnkey production parts to move through our plant, and we're able to handle any of those requests. Whether you need post-process machining, powder analysis, material traceability, mechanical testing, heat treatments, quality inspection ports, we can accommodate all of that. The industry isn't slowing down at all, and we intend on keeping up with it as we move forward here at Protolabs. So we certainly encourage you to reach out to us, any needs that you guys have within the medical industry. We'd love to hear what you're trying to use this technology for and help support you moving forward. And now to take it home, I'm going to kick it back over to Chris. Thank you all for your time. Looking forward to working with you in the future.
And it really is fascinating. When we start talking about that total cost of ownership again, focusing on it, can you replace something that would have taken multiple parts and do it in one 3D printing process? Fascinating. And again, I think we've debunked the myth once and for all. If it wasn't already debunked before, 3D printing in the right case can be a production offer. let's shift gears a little bit and start talking about smart manufacturing. Now, again, I want to say this isn't a buzzword, but it kind of is because it's a very loaded word. By that, I mean, well, smart manufacturing mostly has been considered as manufacturing 4.0, industry 4.0, of that nature. But then I also view it as something slightly different. Is, are you being smart during your manufacturing? And again, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into how those two are related, and we'll figure out at the very end, is it really that smart? So as we talk about this, and we always hear this thing is manufacturing is going digital. Have you made the switch? Well, it's not going digital anymore. It is digital. There is no more transition. There is no more, it's coming. It's here. Thanks to the likes of something like 2020, this was forced upon many people for the likes of good or bad reasons. But again, it's digital. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It is here. So hopefully you've made the switch, or your customers, partners, suppliers, and so on and so forth are also making that switch with you. Now, when I say digital, this isn't just meaning I have the internet and I'm emailing back and forth. Digital is this experience of creating seamless and integrated systems that work with each other that make our lives easier. And now this isn't the likes of replacing us with a robot and we're obsolete. It's assisting or providing a more unique experience that just makes lives better for all of us. So again, it's a digital, but not robot takeover type talk. Now, as things are moving digital, there's obviously a lot of data being created, and the mountain is going up very quickly. And from those of the likes of us at Protolabs, we see a lot of data in our data centers. Would suggest we also have a lot of it. So what's really interesting about this is we say, so what to do with all this data? What are we going to have more available to us as we go through? And the likes of what we hear is artificial intelligence, smart programs running algorithms and debunking all these different geometries. And you know what, to be perfectly honest, we're not quite there, but we're inching closer and closer every day to getting into that, what we're saying is true artificial intelligence. From the likes of it, some people say it's scary, some people are welcoming it with open arms. I think the time will tell. But what's important about this is to understand is, what do we do with the data to make really smart decisions? And from that, it's more of a learning from our mistakes rather than repeating them at high numbers. And so as more data becomes available, those learnings become validated much quicker at a much easier rate. Now, however, that plays into the next aspect of it, but we're going to focus in really on the manufacturing, less on the product side. And what I mean by that is we're talking about digital twin. And as some of you have heard, this is a pretty big buzzword around the industry at the moment. Digital. It's the digital twin of what's actually happening in the world. Now, is it perfect? Not always. But we like to think it's as close to reality as it possibly can be, because we have lots of data that support it and validate what we are assumptions. Now, what is a digital twin mean to you, and how do you use it when you're defining your product or trying to come up with your next best innovational idea? Quad in the mouth, right? So what do you do with it? Now, this is where it becomes interesting, because what we're really focusing on is your supplier who's manufacturing the product for you, or if you are the manufacturer, is you need to understand what is going to happen before you actually make the product. Now, and what I mean by that is this can hopefully help identify some potential defects, some things that might come awry in the manufacturing process. I'll throw out an example. When using a CNC machine, you kind of need to know your tool path, and will the tool cutter absolutely ram into the side of the part, or will it just cruise along nicely and make your final product? Very different outcomes. Now, on the flip side of that, from the business aspect of it, we're also comparing to here as well, is, am I making my part efficiently, utilize all my assets in the right way? And then two, am I charging the right amount? Because as we know, as things become more and more digital, the competitiveness is only increasing more and more. So that, from that perspective, you have to make sure that you're not only putting out a fair price, but your margins are appropriate to your business. There's a lot to there, but we feel honestly that the digital twin is kind of the future, to know what you're getting before you actually start making the product. Again, reducing that risk that Rob talked about at the very beginning around speed. If you make a part but it doesn't work or it's not done correctly, kind of just wasted a bunch of time and have to start all over again. So that, as you move in with speed, is a key thing to help you get that speed. Now, design for manufacturing, as we talked before, is so you can see we're kind of building up the ladder to get to where we want to get. But so we have data, lots of information, digital twin to determine if it's going to work or if the process is going to go all there and move all around and not crash. What the design for manufacturing is that feedback from those two previous ones is understanding where can you make advantage. Now, this isn't just simply made. We think of this as more of a thing is what can I do to make my part more manufacturable, and not just it can or can't, not binary. It's more of a, think of it as a scale, as 0 to 10, as 0 being, yeah, this is not possible, to 10, a washer. Super simple, super easy, really easy to do, and mass quantities. Now, where you fall on that scale really starts to determine your price. So if you're only making 2 or 3 products and you really have to be competitive on that price and you're at low volumes, you want to make sure that that price is really honed in, because it is a magnifier on your potential cost of the company or your profitability. So we view the manufacturing or design for manufacturing aspect of it is really focusing in how could I make the part the most efficient way possible, but the most costly version of it, not the most expensive cost, the least costly. And what that is really telling us or trying to help you guys with is my part competitive? So again, this is that balance, product risk versus manufacturing risk, and balancing it between that and cost. So interesting thing to keep in mind, but something not to forget about. Design for manufacturing just isn't can it be made or not, it's can it be made and can we make it in a more effective manner. So that leads us to our last point, is what's inside the crystal ball of manufacturing 4.0, industry 4.0. What is the next best thing coming out of trade shows and different events? Well, I don't have a crystal ball. I wish I did, but I don't have one. So we'll give you our best opinion as of right now. What we see the future being is digital. We all know it's there, but it's the transmission of data back and forth in a way that's so seamless that things just smooth by nice and easy. But it's not just as simple as sending an email where you hit send, but it's that true interactive feedback where you can take your design, iterate at speeds that are previously not done, but take the data and information you get from those iterations and learn at a much faster rate for the next product. So maybe in the future we see is that you don't have to do design work. You don't have to actually physically make a part to do simulations. Is that simulation can be 3-4 iterations in before you actually make a part. But while doing that, you're also simulating the manufacturing process. Starting to get the picture here on how this is a full circle. Previously, we've always seen that these ecosystems have been very siloed and never connected together. But I think as the manufacturing industry, from the likes of CNC, 3D printing, sheet metal injection molding, laser cutting, metal forming, fabrication, you get the idea. They're all starting to work in a way that is moving at a much faster rate. And likes of Amazon and Walmart and Target, products are moving quicker. The life cycle of them are becoming extremely short, meaning they need to iterate at rates never done before. So again, we've pulled us all back to say is manufacturing is going to have to take a big step up to understand is how do we iterate, how do we design, how do we make things in a more cost-effective manner while still making the product superior or better than the previous version. All tasks to ask for, but I think we're up for the challenge. Digital manufacturing is absolutely help. Now, again, there's tons of players out there. There's totally entire ecosystem of people doing manufacturing, smart manufacturing. We're not by only means the only one. So in general, everyone's going this direction, and I hope you join in that fight and moving in that direction. Let's do a little quick recap here. So speed, how important is it? And unfortunately, the story is pretty true. It really depends. And as you kind of heard throughout this talk, is there are a lot of different factors playing at hand here. And understanding where is your risk and where are you willing or able to take a little bit more riskier bet to edge up on that, so you can maybe get that advantage over your competitor. Now, as you take into consideration there, we move into manufacturing technology. We talked about, pairing the right technology or the right manufacturing process and where your product life cycle is. Don't go for the gun-ho home run solution out of the gate before you've ever tested or validated your product. Edge up to it appropriately. That way you're keeping your investment smart or risk adverse. But what's important also to mention here too is it's just not understanding what technology, but it's playing that transition period of prototype and production. How do you make that transition? Are you taking into consideration all the potential risk factors, all the things that might happen, and ensuring your design is indeed ready for the future and not going to cost you down the road after your product's been on the market? Next, we go into 3D printing. Stephen mentioned there are a lot of great technologies out there, a lot of different things happening around the space, and it's moving quite quickly. From ventilator parts that could have been made in multiple injection molded parts made in a single assembly to jet engines and rocket engines. It has tremendous amount of opportunity, and we've debunked, I think, like many in the industry, 3D printing in the right application absolutely is a viable production need. Again, focusing in on that total cost ownership, as we talked about in the previous couple slides ago. Why not? Why not use 3D printing? Just go for it. You know what? Have at her. Print everything. Maybe not be the best solution, but we think it is starting to trend in that direction. So, moving on. Lastly, smart manufacturing. Again, more than just manufacturing. It's maximizing the digital experience. And what we're talking about there is this exchange, breaking the silos of what was previously, just simulation, just manufacturing, just assembly. These walls are starting to come down, to the digital manufacturing ecosystem is starting to exchange data like never before. So be prepared for that to come and understand matching it with your speed, your technology, and the likes of 3D printing as a potential solution. This is really starting to come into factors. There are different solutions or different viable options you can take at all stages of your product life cycle, from making one part to hundreds of millions. And again, it's taking a good step back to think about what makes sense today, but how does that decision today potentially affect your future? Again, don't lock yourself into 3D printing a part that's the size of a boat when you need to make 1 million of them a year. It might not be feasible. So keeping all that stuff in mind. So again, fast recap of everything we talked about today. Again, this isn't going to be your secret solution or your secret formula to being the rock star of new product development or managing product throughout its life cycle. But we're hoping that this is a few tips and tricks that kind of scratch the idea or give you something to think about while moving through each one of these processes. And again, it's not the magic formula because it really depends. And even we still don't know sometimes what is the magic formula. So, closing thoughts. I want to leave you with one thing, and we always talk about this at Protolabs: if innovation starts with one bold idea. Again, it can be small, it can be big, it can be medium, it can be of all sizes. What was really fascinating about the medical industry and what we have always gravitated for is that it only takes one bold idea to improve the lives of many. And so what we're hoping you guys take away from this is, how do you transition from that bold idea to improving the lives of many? Hopefully today's talk will give you a little bit of insight there, or at least begin to ask some questions and have some conversations around how we might be able to help, or who else in the industry is out there and can help you guys tackle these challenges. Again, thank you so much for your time. If you are catching this video outside of the normal booth time, feel free to give us a call. Otherwise, if you have any questions, feel free to drop in the booth, or if you're watching this live, there's a question box there. It's in one of the corners. You know what to do. Anyways, thanks again. And from the entire one at the Protolabs family, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video.